Have you seen that monstrosity of a film, Fury?
Yep, the one with Brad Pitt. Well, imagine that, but in World War I with a British tank in the mud of Passchendaele. And yes, unlike the American film, our story today is 100% true. So let's set the scene. A battlefield of mud, shell craters and relentless gunfire. In the heart of this chaos sits a single British tank, stranded and battered but somehow still fighting. It's 1917, the height of the First World War, and the crew inside this tank that's nicknamed Frey Bentos are about to embark on a battle so harrowing, so beyond belief that it would make them the most decorated tank crew of the war. This isn't just another war story, it's a tale of endurance, of humour in the face of death, of ordinary British men refusing to give in even as their tank is hit from all sides. If you're a lover of incredible British history, if you're drawn to stories of impossible odds, then this story of Frey Bentos is one for the ages. Prepare yourself, this is what true British grit looks like. It's the 22nd of August 1917. F Battalion Tank Corps is part of a grand plan to capture a series of fortified German farmhouses near Saint-Julien during what would become known as the Third Battle of Ypres, or to many people the Battle of Passchendaele. Among the tanks in this assault is Frey Bentos, or F-41, a lumbering male Mark IV fitted with two 6-pounder cannons with sponsons on either side and several Lewis guns, one on each side and another at the front. The tank weighed over 28 tons and its top speed, get this, was a staggering 4 miles per hour. The crew is led by Second Lieutenant George Hill, a no-nonsense officer. Alongside tough lads, there's Sergeant Robert Misson, Lance Corporal Ernest Brady and 5 gunners. With them in the tank is their section commander, Captain Donald Richardson. Now, before the war, Richardson had been a grocer in Nottingham. I'm an East Midlands lad myself, so I like him already. He worked for his family business, but when war broke out, he signed up as a private, worked his way up through the ranks, eventually joining the Tank Corps. Richardson named their tank Frey Bentos after the famous brand of tinned meat, perhaps as a grim joke about what could happen to a tank crew if things went wrong. Tinned meat indeed. British humour, equal parts dark and disturbing. Let's face it, that's what made us great. Anyway, it's just past 4:40 AM when Frey Bentos roars into life, leading the charge towards Somme Farm, their first objective. But it doesn't take long for things to go wrong. Torrential rains have turned the ground into a quagmire, pitted with water-filled shell craters. Many of the other tanks bog down or break down, unable even to reach the starting point. But Frey Bentos under Hill's steady hand makes it forward. The German machine guns open up, bullets hammering the tank. Hill reaches forward to close the front flap, but in that moment a hail of bullets clatters into the tank, sending sparks flying, and Hill's hit, his face and hands peppered with metal fragments. Despite the pain, he keeps going. On the port side, gunner Bud opens fire, silencing a German machine gun nest with precision. Meanwhile, Captain Richardson, spotting German infantry scrambling in the trenches, takes up a Lewis gun and unleashes a barrage, mowing down any Germans in sight. Richardson sees British infantry struggling forward through the mud. Confident that the soldiers can handle mopping up Somme Farm, he gives the order to advance to the next objective, Gallipoli Farm. But fate intervenes. Right, let's be honest, if you're watching this channel, you probably love a good campaign. So what if I told you you could take part in one right now without having to sign up for the military, get shelled in no man's land or drink muddy puddle water? In fact, you can actually stay at home and get paid for it, no trench foot required. It's an app called TesterUp and it lets you earn real money by testing apps and doing questionnaires, that sort of thing. Here's how it works, dead simple, squaddy proof even. Sign up, free, no faff, pick an app to test, there are loads to choose from. Complete simple tasks like playing a game, answer a few questions. Job done, money in your account.
Not bad.
And unlike volunteering for a 19th century army, there's no dodgy contracts or small print you need to worry about. It's also worth knowing there's no fees, no hidden nonsense. It's more transparent than your average officer's battle plan. You can sign up faster than a Tommy can brew up in the trenches. And get paid up to 80 quid per test. Not exactly officer's pay, but it will certainly keep you in rum rations for a while. And with over 1 million users and a 4.2 rating on Trustpilot, this isn't some back alley mercenary outfit. And the best bit, new testing opportunities are cropping up all the time, so you're never going to be stuck in no man's land wondering when someone's going to blow the whistle. So if you fancy a mission that doesn't involve getting shot at or having to push a Mark IV out of a bog, then sign up for TesterUp now and start getting paid. Big thanks to Testrup for sponsoring today's film. Now let's get back to the lads of Frey Bentos, who had a bit of a harder time earning their pay. With the front flap open once more, Hill tries to steer around craters and obstacles, but his vision is faltering. His wounds have left his face swollen, obscuring his sight. Richardson takes over the controls, but before Hill can fully retreat from his post, another volley of machine gun fire rips through the flap. A bullet ricochets around and strikes Hill in the neck, opening a terrible wound, and he collapses onto the throttle. The tank lurches forward, plunging into a deep crater. A ricochet also hits Richardson in the leg, but he carries on. Inside the cramped dark tank, Richardson realises they're stuck. He tries to drive out, but Frey Bentos' engine stalls, straining as it tries to pull them up and out of the crater. They slide back, the tank wedging itself at an awkward angle half on its side, the nose pointed skyward. The unditching beams, heavy steel-clad lengths of wood meant to help free themselves, are strapped to the roof. But reaching them would mean having to leave the tank exposed to enemy fire. Sergeant Misson and Lance Corporal Brady do volunteer to go though, brave lads. Misson attempts to get out but sees a German machine gun team just 30 yards away firing at them, and understandably has second thoughts. Brady though carries on. The side door is wedged shut by the angle of the tank, so he climbs out onto the top into the line of fire. The crew hears his footsteps above them, then the sound of bolts being loosened, only for a burst of enemy fire to riddle him with bullets. He slides off the tank, the unditching beams falling with him. Richardson watches in horror, knowing Brady has paid the ultimate price. Brave lad. With no way to move the tank, Richardson decides they'll fight from where they are. The Germans, realising the tank is immobilised, increase their fire. Shrapnel from a shell rips through one of the gun ports, tearing off part of Gunner Arthur's jaw and embedding in his chest. Blooded and shaken, the crew rally. They discover that by fully depressing one of the 6-pounder guns, they can still just about aim at the German positions from their awkward angle. By midday, Richardson jots a grim note in his diary. It says, 1200 hours, Brady killed, Hill, Arthurs and self-wounded, Sergeant Misson steady as a rock, Bud, Binley, Maury and True all a bit shaken, True bearing up best. As the day wears on, it becomes clear that the British attack has failed. The infantry has fallen back to their lines some 500 yards away, leaving Frey Bentos alone. Bud requests permission to try for the unditching beam, and Richardson agrees, joining him in a risky attempt. But as soon as they exit the tank, machine gun fire forces them back inside. An attempt to restart the tank only causes it to slide further into the crater, one of the 6-pounders crashing into the ground. Inside, the breach spins around, smashing into Bud's ribcage. Blood trickles from his mouth as he mutters, "Oh, I feel all broken up inside." The heat inside the tank is suffocating, reaching 30 degrees. The August sun turns their metal box into an oven. The air reeks of petrol, oil, cordite, blood, and flies swarm all over Arthur's shattered face. Richardson, normally strict about cleanliness, quips to Misson, "It'll take a lot of cleaning up after this, Sergeant." Misson just smiles grimly. The Germans, furious at this stubborn British crew, start firing trench mortars now. Then, just as you think things couldn't get any worse, the unthinkable happens. The British, not realising that the tank crew is still alive, begin shelling Frey Bentos, trying to deny it to the enemy. The crew waves white rags and scraps of clothing through the rear door, desperate to signal to their comrades. But the bombardment continues. Sergeant Misson, ever bold, volunteers to sprint back to British lines and call off the fire. Richardson considers it too dangerous in daylight, but Misson quips, "Bit fed up with sitting around here doing nothing, sir." That night, Richardson finally gives him the green light. Misson climbs out and disappears into the darkness. The rest of the crew brace themselves for a German counterattack. Richardson counts their remaining weapons. There's one working Lewis gun, 2 revolvers and a rifle. Despite their wounds, they're determined to fight on. Just after midnight, Gunner Maury spots Germans creeping up on them. Suddenly there's the sound of heavy footsteps on the roof. Richardson rushes to the door and flings it open, revolver in hand. He shoots down a German soldier holding a grenade. One of the gunners scrambles to the door and is in the process of closing it when the grenade goes off, sending shards of metal into the tank, wounding him in the shoulder and the head. Richardson opens the door again, giving himself just enough room to fire his remaining 5 shots and disperses a couple of Germans who are approaching. This prompts more mortar fire, and with the main door ajar, mud and water begin to seep into the tank, slowly filling it up. Terrifying stuff, isn't it? I can't even imagine the horror of hearing the enemy on the roof, the dark, the heat, the smell, the mud, the water coming in. My gosh, our ancestors were tough lads. By dawn the next day, the shelling begins again. Gunner Binley, who was by the sponson door, has part of his scalp ripped off by a piece of shrapnel. There's a lot of blood, but it isn't fatal. Richardson applies a hasty bandage to help stop the bleeding. On top of everything, they're out of clean water and thirst is driving them crazy. They're forced to drain oily brown water from the radiator and drink that. Not pleasant. The crew remain stranded for the entire day. Richardson considers the crew making a dash for their own lines, but he's aware that the tank was a thorn in the German side, making it impossible for them to successfully counterattack against the British. That night at around 1 a.m, Maury spots a couple of figures cautiously approaching the tank from the rear. In the dark, he can't tell if it's friend or foe. He and Richardson observe them creeping from shell hole to shell hole. As they come close, they spot the distinctive German helmet. It's on again. Then a very light is fired into the air, revealing many more enemy. It really is squeaky bum time inside the tank. Surely it's all over now. Earlier in the story, you may remember that Sergeant Misson had made a run for the British lines during the first night. Well, good news, he had made it. Now, the British knew that the tank crew was still alive and started doing all they could to protect them. At this key point in the fight, they open up on the German infantry with Vickers machine guns. As the British fire comes in, Richardson slams the door shut, taking cover. It did the trick, and the night passed without too much further trouble. A couple of other attacks were broken up, aided by more very lights sent up in intervals to keep a protective eye over the tank. Okay, so now it's the third day of Frey Bentos' ordeal. Food and water is finished and their ammunition's dangerously low. Satisfied that the crew have done all they can, Richardson decides that they would attempt to withdraw come nightfall. Through the day, the crew suffered what had become the usual mortar and machine gun fire, as well as the occasional shell, one of which struck the left track, ripping a hole in the nose of the tank. A gunner who'd been manning the Lewis gun at the time was hit by flying metal, which slashed his face open. That night, with all but one man in the tank now wounded, with no food or water and the crew at the limit of their endurance, Richardson announces his plan to retire at dusk. As you can imagine, there were a few sighs of relief. When the time comes to leave, the crew remove the firing mechanisms from the 6-pounders to render them useless. Then, one by one, they slip out of the tank. It's a dangerous journey through the dark. They're carrying the wounded men and the Lewis guns. Despite the shells and the bullets, all the crew beat the odds and astonishingly make it back, leaving absolutely nothing for the Germans. Not surprisingly, the crew became the most decorated tank crew of the entire war. Richardson and Hill both received the Military Cross. Sergeant Misson and Gunner Maury were awarded the DCM, and the rest of the surviving crew each received a military medal. Sadly, Lance Corporal Brady's act of gallantry, remember when he climbed up onto the roof of the tank, went unrewarded, since both the Distinguished Conduct Medal and the Military Medal could not be awarded posthumously. The Germans never did capture Frey Bentos. She sat in the crater in disputed ground until recovered and handed over to No. 2 Field Company for salvage purposes. She was later scrapped. Special thanks for Neil Thornton for researching and co-writing this episode. I'll put a link to his publishing company in the description below. They do great books, highly recommend checking them out. In the meantime, I'll be back with another fascinating slice of British military history next week. And while you're waiting for that, YouTube thinks that you'll enjoy the video that's on screen now. Alright guys, take care.